Hello everyone, my name is Chris Snodgrass, and today I want to talk to you about a man who is the epitome of what a leader should be, and that is General and First President of the United States, George Washington. Now I hope after this presentation you'll come away with a better understanding and more of an appreciation for just how good of a leader George Washington was, and as well as see how these competencies that we've been learning throughout the course have been in place far longer than they've been documented concepts, for lack of a better word. Now, at the end of the slide, there is going to be a reference slide for you to find your own information if you wish to do more information and research on your own. And I would also like to ask everyone to please hold their questions until the end of the presentation. All right, with that being said, let's get started. George Washington was born February 22nd in 1732 on his father's plantation in Westmoreland County, Virginia. And he's the eldest son of Augustine Washington and Mary Ball, who together had 6 children, but he also had 3 older siblings from his father's first marriage. So he was right around the middle of 9 kids. They moved around a lot when he was younger. They moved to Little Hunting Creek Camp in 1735, which was later renamed and more famously known as Mount Vernon. And he spent much of his childhood in a place called Ferry Farm, where they moved in 1738. But again, they did move around quite a few places when he was growing up. And we know very little about George Washington's childhood. What we do know mostly stems from the fables and myths that everyone's heard about chopping down the cherry tree, or telling his father, "I cannot tell a lie." Now, what we know about this is that these stem from the fact that Washington was very adamant about integrity and honesty. It's well documented and well admired by many people who knew him personally, that they had never met anybody as honest and as bent on integrity as Washington. So his father died when he was about 11 and left many of his assets to his older half-brothers, which left him with relatively little as compared to them. And what little we know about his education is that he excelled in mathematics, and he also studied surveying. Now, his formal education ended when he was about 15 years old. He never went to college, never studied a foreign language, which was very uncommon for males at the time to do so. Usually they would after 15 or so, they would go off to back to Europe or London to study and go to college. Okay, so Washington was given command of the Continental Forces by Continental Congress, despite having very little experience with maneuvering forces. Now, he had been in charge of forces before, but they were static forces, which basically means they were guarding a stationary post. They were providing guard, basically. They didn't move, they didn't maneuver, they didn't go to any other place. They had their post, and that's where they stayed. So he had to learn on the job, and he was faced with a very difficult task because he was leading a band of rebels against the most formidable military of the time. I mean, they were fighting the British, so it wasn't easy. They suffered losses, especially in the beginning. There was a string of losses from starting with Long Island in August 1776, and then in Kips Bay, White Plains, and then ultimately part of his army had surrendered Fort Washington in November of 1776. Now, despite these early losses, Washington had an innate ability to inspire his men to stay in the fight, and against a much more formidable force, as we mentioned before. Most notably Princeton, January 1777. This was a big bounce back. This was a few months after the battle at Long Island, where the Continental Forces lost New York. Yorktown in October of 1781, which effectively ended the war, as this was the battle that convinced the British that they should start looking at other ways to end the war, like through peace treaties rather than by force. So, and then there's also the battle at Monmouth in June of 1778, which we'll get into in the next slide. This was a battle that was critical and really shows Washington's leadership abilities. So in 1778, General Howe of the British Army, he had been in Philadelphia for quite a while, and he was requesting relief of duty in Philadelphia. He wanted to return to England, so he was being replaced by General Clinton, who, once he got there, he soon decided to move from Philadelphia to New York. So upon hearing this, Washington, who had just gone through Valley Forge, the terrible winter that we've all heard about, the men were starving, they were freezing, they didn't have a lot of food, they didn't have a lot of ammunition, they were running out of supplies. He decides to cut off General Clinton in his route to New York. Now, he gave command of the initial assault element of the ambush to General Lee, and General Lee reluctantly accepted because he didn't really have a lot of confidence in what was about to happen. He didn't think Washington's plan was going to work, but ultimately he actually turned it down to begin with, and ultimately he chose to accept responsibility for it. So Washington wanted Lee to attack the British from the rear because they were very slow moving. They had big guns that they had to carry, so they couldn't get across. They couldn't move across a lot of terrain at a very high rate of speed. So Lee did this, but unfortunately, he didn't formulate a plan. He didn't give any orders. He pretty much just told his officers to do whatever they needed to do to get the job done. So this resulted in just absolute chaos. So once the British got the upper hand, Lee ordered a retreat. Now, when him and his men were retreating through the forest, British right on their tails, they ran into Washington's element, who was maneuvering in a position to flank the enemy. Now, this is said to be the only time that George Washington ever cursed. He was very much against profanity. He felt that civilized men should be able to communicate without using profanity, and if they couldn't, then, well, they weren't civilized men. So, so he reorganized Lee's element, he gave orders, and he led an attack back on the British, which the battle ultimately ended in a draw. Nobody really won, but it dealt a severe blow to the British where it slowed down their movement. They took some casualties. It lessened their supplies. And they ultimately they were the ones that ended up falling back and breaking contact from that particular battle. So in this battle, Washington utilized legitimate power, right, as the men obeyed him because he was their commanding officer. I mean, he was the commanding officer of the entire Continental Forces. All right, but he also used referent power in the fact that the men had seen what they could accomplish under him. They saw what he was capable of. And they had the utmost admiration and respect for him in the sense that they knew that Washington knew what he was doing and he was going to get them through whatever they needed to get through. So after the war, Washington resigned his commission in 1783. He had no desire to hold public office. He wanted to return to Mount Vernon and just live his life. He came out of retirement in 1787 to oversee the Continental Constitutional Convention and save the nation from the Articles of Confederacy, which were just absolutely terrible. After the convention, he was elected first president of the United States, and despite hoping to return to Mount Vernon, he again faced a job that he was not prepared for, and he had to learn on the job. He was very aware that his actions as the first president would set the precedent for future presidents, so he was very cautious about what he did. In his first term, he had struggles with western expansion. The Indian tribes were encouraged by the British in the Northwest to hold off western expansion, and the Spanish actually controlled the Mississippi River and denied America access to that. So westward expansion was a bit of a struggle. And then in the second term of the French Revolution, what happened at the onset of his presidency, and he ultimately opted to stay neutral and denied help to the French, despite the fact that they had helped America during the Revolutionary War, because he felt like getting us into a war at that point would be detrimental to the economy and the nation. So in summary, General/President George Washington, again, the epitome of what a leader should be, took on new challenges with confidence. He remained positive and determined throughout his life despite experiencing devastating losses. He leaned heavily on determination, courage, integrity. He could inspire and motivate others to perform at a high level, as evidence of leading a ragtag band of misfits, basically against the most formidable army in the world. And he also championed change by coming out of retirement to oversee the creation of the Constitution. I mean, we were going one direction, and he knew that was the wrong direction to go, so he came out of retirement. It's like, I'm just going to handle it myself. So, so that's Washington, and I hopefully everybody here has gained a little knowledge, better understanding, more of an appreciation of President Washington. And if you would like, here are some references that I utilized to find the information that I did. If you want to do any other research on President Washington, he's a fascinating subject and a great man to look up to and admire. So that being said, I hope you all took something away from this, and thank you very much.